Hey everybody, how's it going? So in this video, we're going to look at setting up our AWS account and understanding the basics of IAM in AWS. So let's get to it. So what I have in front of me right now is the main AWS website known at aws.amazon.com. And basically this is the splash page that they have at the moment. Now, if you have never used AWS before, you're going to get a button in this top right hand corner that says complete sign up, or it might say sign up. I'm not quite sure actually, because I believe I've used sign up before. Now, when I click that button, you may get a sign in screen, you may get a sign up screen. If you've never been there before, you should get this screen right here. So you can sign up for a 12-month free tier access, and everybody gets this by default. So if I come in here now and I type an email address, say, whatever my email is, and password has to be quite complex, so it has to be at least 8 characters, and basically have a combination of uppercase, lowercase numbers, and a symbol. So I'm going to satisfy those requirements, and then I'm going to do the same here. And my account name, I'll just put Lyrad Digital and click continue. So you'll now get a contact screen. Now I can fill all this in, but I'm not going to do that. And the reason I'm not going to do that is because I already have an account. But basically what will happen is you'll fill in your company name, a phone number, a country of where you live, your address, all that other stuff. And then you'll come here, check this box and go create account and continue. Now, when you go to create account and continue, it will ask you to put in a credit card. So in order to have an AWS account, you do require the use of a credit card. So that's just something to keep in mind. When all this happens, you will be authenticated and logged in. So what does that look like? Essentially, you'll get something that looks like this page. Now, yours might be a little bit different to mine. It depends on, exactly when you look at this video. You might be looking at this video at a later date, and this UI might be completely different. But what we'll be doing is going to be pretty much the same. So basically what I want to show now that we're logged into what we refer to here as the console, I want to be able to basically create some extra users, okay, so that we can have other administrators log into my AWS account and do things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a number of ways you can access it. So IAM is the thing that we're trying to target. I have it as a link here because I've recently visited it, but you can also type it in this text box here and it'll come up as an option. If you don't have this on the screen, you can come up to services and you get the same view here. And once again, you can type IAM and select it. It's also down in this list. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but it'd be in this list somewhere as well if you look hard for it. It's also over here to my left-hand side because, once again, I've used it before. So I'm going to go into IAM. And it takes a little bit to load. So what is IAM and why do we care about it? Well, IAM essentially stands for Identity and Access Management, and it's basically how we handle users in AWS. So at the moment, I'm logged into the system as my root account, as we call it. And basically, if you've just created an account yourself, you would have been logged in as the root account as well. Now, AWS doesn't recommend that people use their root account when doing stuff in AWS. They recommend that you create individual IAM user accounts and assign them administration rights. And then you only use this root account for billing purposes. So at the moment, I actually have no users in this in my account here that's intended. So I can show you guys how this works. So you can see in this security status thing here a couple of cautionary areas. Now, the one thing I've also set up for my account is this thing known as Multi-Factor Authentication. I've set that up already for my root account. I will show you how you can do that for an individual administration account. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go over and look at this list here, and we have a list of options here. We have groups, we have users, we have roles, policies, and then a bunch of other stuff. Now, these last three links I'm not going to talk about simply because they're beyond the scope of what we need to do to start off with. So, users obviously is users, users that we need to create so that people can access this AWS account. And basically, as I just mentioned, we really should be creating an administration user and logging in as them. So I'm going to add a new user here, and I'm going to call this user console admin user. And the reason for that is that I'm only going to allow them to access the AWS Management Console. Now, there's another access ability that you can do for your users, and that's to give only programmatic access, i.e. we can use scripts to modify and change things in the AWS account. But for this account, I'm just going to check the Management Console because I only want this user to be able to log into the web portal and change things. Underneath that, we can set the password for this user. You can either have it auto-generated and sent to the user, or we can specify a custom password. I'm going to specify a custom password here just simply because I want to make it easy for myself. So I'm going to put in a password here. I think the minimum is 6 characters. Not quite sure, we'll find out in a second. Required password reset. I'm actually going to uncheck this. And what do we got here? Password, it has to be 12 characters long. So I'm going to do one with 12 characters long and requires an uppercase letter. So let me try this. Cool. So I've satisfied the requirements, and now I'm going to click next. And what we have here is a permission screen. Now in AWS, we can set up what is referred to as permissions, but also known as policies. So a policy is basically a group of permissions. Now we will be doing a little bit more around this later when we get into the actual automation side of things. But just to start off with, when we do the manual stuff, we're going to let AWS do a lot of this stuff for us. But just understand that policies are a group of permissions that a particular user, or what we'll find in a minute, a role, can do. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to attach an existing policy directly to this. And the one I'm going to attach is administrator access. This gives me full access to anything inside of AWS. And that's what I want for this administration account. So I'm going to click next to review. And you can see it's just telling me at the moment that's the username, that's the access type, that's the console password, so on and so forth. I'm now going to go and create user. And success. So what we get now once we get a success screen is it will tell us that there's a link where this administrator user can log in, right? So each account usually starts off with account name.signin.aws.amazon.com/console, right? So if your account's called ABC, then it'd be abc.signin.aws and so on. You basically get it, right? Now the user information here, we can choose to send an email directly to them now to tell them that what their username and password is, or in the case of what I'm going to do, I'm just going to log in. All right. So what does that look like? It looks like this. So it's a different login screen to the root account that we normally log in with. You can actually change to go back to the root account if you really want here. but for this example, I'm going to go in as the administrator. So the IAM username that I put was console admin user, and the password was whatever the password was, and I'm going to click sign in. So now I'm signed in using just the administrator account and not the root account, which is what AWS recommends. So I get the same screen once again. Now I'm going to continue looking at some more IAM stuff here. So I'm going to click on that. And I want to explain a few other things here. So first and foremost, you'll see that we've covered creating an individual IAM user now. That's no longer in caution. However, we still need to create a group and assign permissions. So what is a group? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It is what you think it is. It's a group where you can put multiple users into, right? And so I'm going to come here and I'm going to create an administrators group for my account. Administrators. Go next step. Now for a group, we can actually specify permissions on that as well, and that will be kind of like the base permissions for any users that are a part of this group. And then if a user has more specific permissions, those override these permissions. But this allows us to create a base set of permissions for a group of users. So for this administrators group, I'm going to give everybody administrator access. So click next and then click create group. Now there's nobody in there at the moment, so I'm going to once again come on and click in there and click add users to group. I'm going to add myself into that group and then go add users. So now I'm part of the admin or the administrators group. So if anything changes in here, it'll be inherited by me. And if for whatever reason I never became an administrator on myself, i.e. I removed any permissions on myself, I would still have full administrator access because I'm part of the administrators group. Okay. So that's that. Now, before I get into roles and policies, I'm going to come back up to dashboard. And you can see now we've got all the green ticks. But there's just one thing I always like to do for each account. So if I come over to users again, and I click on myself, what I want to do is I want to click on this security credentials tab. Now, I mentioned earlier there's this thing called Multi-Factor Authentication. And basically, I've set it up for the root account, so you never actually saw me do that. But I can actually set it up for an individual account as well. So I'm going to come in here, and where it says assigned MFA device, I'm going to go manage. And there's three options that you can choose here for multi-factor authentication. The one I'm going to be choosing is just a virtual device, i.e. it's just an app on your phone called Google Authenticator that I will use to get a set of numbers, essentially, that will be sent to my phone that I can then type in and then I can authenticate that way. Now, the other two options is UTF security key. That's kind of like a physical key that you take around with you. And it's like you put it into the USB and you press a button and it authenticates that way. And this last one is something to do with tokens. Not fully aware of exactly how that works, but it's like a token-based system that's stored in somewhere called Gemalto, I think, if I remember right. Yeah, it says it there. Yeah, so I don't know much about the last one, but the other ones, this is just a physical key. But I'm going to be using my phone to do this. So, and I think most of you would. So let's do that. Click continue. And then what comes up is you basically get a QR code. And if you have your phone, basically you grab your phone and you point it at the screen. So I'm going to be doing that right now. You can't see this, but I'm doing it. You might be able to hear it. So that little beep that you just heard was me scanning that QR code. And then a bunch of digits come up on the screen. Now, you see down the bottom the MFA code 1 and MFA code 2. Basically, on your phone, you'll have 6 digits. and they will be valid for a certain period of time. So you'll see like there's a ticker. If you have Google Authenticator, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. So you just have to put in the next two sets of numbers that come in on your phone. So I'm just doing that now. 804. And if I go sign MFA and I did this right, it's going to tell me that I've successfully assigned a virtual MFA. So now I have multi-factor authentication. So if you want to see how that works, basically what I'll do now is I'll log out and go sign out. And if I go back to sign into the console, I'm going to get that same sign-in screen I had before. So I put in, once again, console admin user and the password. But now I get this multi-factor authentication code. Now, that's basically the same code that you have in Google Authenticator. You just have to type in the digits. Now, I can safely do this because it changes every 60 seconds, I believe. And now, once again, I'm logged in as the admin user. And I'm back to here. So just a couple more things I want to cover about IAM before we move on. The next thing I want to talk about is roles. So a role is essentially, it's a group of policies and permissions that can be applied to a service. Essentially, most of the time you will use it on a service that you have running in AWS. So an AWS account might want to have access to S3, right? Say the code build needs to get an artifact and therefore it needs to be able to get the artifact from an S3 bucket. Well, it needs access to that. So you can create a role that the code build service will use that will have access to be able to get the artifact. Right? So if I come here and click create role, we can either do it at AWS service level. You can use it for cross-account stuff. Now, I'm going to talk about that much later. And there's a bunch of other ones with Cognito and SAML, but I'm not going to talk about those either because they're not important. But generally what you're going to do is you're going to set one up for a service. So say I'm going to go code build, and let's say allows code build to call AWS services on your behalf. So we'll go next, click permissions, and let's say we give code build full access, right? And we'll call it code build full access. So what this does is it gives me a role now that I can assign to code build or to a code build project, which we will see later, and we can do anything with that code build project. Might not seem to make a lot of sense right now, but when we get to it later and we go more in depth, you'll understand. So if I click on this roles now, we have this thing called a trust relationship. And the trust relationship is basically saying, I'm allowed to apply the sets of permissions to only code build services. Right? So no other service can use this role except for anything that's code build related. So that's essentially what this is. It's referred to as a trust relationship. So generally you'll see a service in here that it trusts, but you can also set it up for user accounts. That's a more complicated matter. Also, as part of the role, if I come over to Access Advisor, it will load a whole bunch of stuff that I have access to, and that's because I have full administration rights. So these are all the services that this role can work with, and basically, because I'm using administrator access, I can pretty much do anything in those services using this role, okay? And basically, when we look at permissions, we're looking at this thing called policy. So I may have already mentioned the term policy. And a policy is essentially a bunch of JSON that specifies permissions. So for this one, we're saying we're allowing access to any kind of action on anything inside of AWS. So the star means anything. So anything that we can perform any kind of action in AWS against any kind of resource. So a service in AWS is known as a resource. An action is kind of like something you can do on a service itself. So that's pretty much policies. Now you can sign them directly to roles, and they're referred to as inline policies, or you can create policies outside of roles and then assign them later. Okay, I'm not going to go into too much about how to create policies outside of roles, because generally what I'm going to be doing is setting policies when I create roles. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. It was a lot to take in, I'm sure. But try and maybe watch this video a couple of times if I sped through, or if you have any questions, just leave it in the comments. And in the next video, we're going to start looking at S3 and setting up a bucket so that we can deploy our Angular website code. So I'll see you in the next video.